Now, we have a very special guest from our distinguished sponsor, NATO. First of all, I would like to express our gratitude to him for being here and attending our conference. He is the Deputy Head of Engagements for NATO. Dr. Petr, Lunak, you have the stage.
First of all, thank you very much for this kind of invitation. It is not my first time to Turkey, but it's my first time to Ankara, and I have to say that I find Ankara a very hospitable place. I participated in the debates of the NATO committee this morning. I found it impressive. We already had I think quite an exchange this morning. And in fact, with your permission, I think we should, because when I was in your age, I hated when people in suits lectured me. So I will, with your kind permission, I will just make a few introductory remarks, and if that is fine with you, we'll continue with questions and answers, because I was only able to share my views and experience with only those who actually participate in the NATO part. But let me start with my little introduction with a personal reminiscence, because indeed, when I was in your age, it would have never occurred to me that I would at some point work for NATO, because when I was in your age, I was doing my military service in the Czechoslovak People's Army, which was supposed to fight NATO. It was not my choice, by the way. I was a college graduate, and all college graduates had actually military rank, and NATO was our enemy. It was not my choice, I can assure you, and not my generation's choice. And in fact, I was a platoon commander, and our military corps was supposed to be in Lyon, in France, on the 9th day of hostilities. That was the Cold War. 25 years later, I'm in Ankara, talking about NATO and NATO's future to students from Turkey. I still think this is quite something quite amazing, not because of me, but it just shows how things can change, and in this particular case, for the better. But we should not take all those changes that has taken place the last 20 years for granted, because in fact, what I'm going to talk about now is the recent changes, the recent developments, which actually bring us back a few decades back in the past. What I think is happening and what we think in NATO, and that was the result of the Wales summit, which took place in early September, was that we are basically seeing a military aggression by a country that we believed was a partner. NATO, for the last 20 years, has been trying to establish or build an enduring partnership with Russia. The last 5 years especially, since the Lisbon summit in 2010, were filled with various efforts on NATO's part to turn NATO-Russia partnership into a genuine strategic partnership. I have to say that with the benefit of hindsight, this effort unfortunately was not successful. What we are seeing what we are seeing now is actually that NATO's vision for Europe free, united, and at peace itself has been threatened. In the East, in Eastern Europe, basically by Russia's action, but also by the developments connected with ISIS, and that brings me closer to your region. NATO as an alliance will not stand idly by, and that I think what can be said about the decisions that we took at Wales Summit a month ago. NATO, as an alliance, decided to adopt a so-called Dragons Action Plan, whereby we will have a spearhead force or very high readiness joint force, which can be deployed in order to defend member countries. We have decided to have more exercises to make sure that those countries who need to be reassured and who need to be defended will feel that NATO is here for them, and it will help if need be. We also took a number of initiatives, in fact, linked directly to the current Russia-Ukraine crisis. As far as Russia is concerned, we confirm that the earlier decisions to suspend all civilian and military practical cooperation will be suspended, which is something that we already decided in the spring, but the summit leaders decided to confirm that decision until Russia behaves differently, until Russia behaves as a true partner, as a constructive power in post-World War settlement. We also launched a number of initiatives vis-à-vis Ukraine, mainly setting up trust funds to help train Ukrainian armed forces, help them with logistics, command and control, help with medical rehabilitation of wounded soldiers, help with how to defend a country with cyber attacks. All these, in addition, and all these measures have been taken in addition, in fact, to measures taken by individual member countries. Some individual member countries, in fact, help Ukraine by providing what we call non-lethal military aid to Ukraine, like body armors. As you know, the Ukrainian armed forces, due to the last few years of Yanukovych regime, in fact, are in very bad shape, and the NATO allies, including your country, are very much supportive. In fact, Turkey is very instrumental in providing help and advice in terms of cyber defense. In fact, your country sent a BNC, which stands for Voluntary National Contribution, precisely in the area of cyber defense. We also in NATO feel that the hopes that we had for the future will not hold, and therefore the feeling that we can somehow use the peace dividend, that is to spend less and less on defense and security, have not been justified by the current developments. And unfortunately, the defense investment, spending on defense for most member countries has been going down for the last 2 decades. In fact, 12 years ago, NATO allies promised to spend at least 2% on defense. There are only 5 countries, and unfortunately Turkey is not one of them. A few years ago Turkey was one of them, but Turkey is not among them. And precisely for that reason, NATO countries, NATO allies, decided or made a pledge that those countries who do spend 2%, which a few years ago was seen as a minimum, as a bare minimum to continue to provide security to its member countries, will continue to do so, and those who do not will do so will try to do so within a decade. At the same time, NATO countries also promised or pledged to spend at least 20% on research and development and new equipment, because there are easily, a number of countries in NATO who spend almost 70% of their defense spending on personal expenses such as pension funds. So, for all this, I think it is important that NATO alliance, in fact, is up to the task. Nevertheless, the question really is whether a political military alliance such as NATO, or what is the value added in the current situation? Because the conflict that we are seeing in Ukraine is not a traditional military conflict. It is not forces or forces. It is not, a war as we in the traditional sense. What we see is a hybrid war, which has characterized Russian military action against Ukraine since the occupation and illegal annexation of Crimea. It's basically a clandestine subversion with people or by armed forces which do not wear distinctions or are not attributed actually to a particular country, coupled with propaganda war, where facts simply do not matter, with cyber attacks, and of course it remains to be seen what such a traditional, in many ways, organization such as NATO can do to address that particular threat. I think we all need to follow that debate and make sure that the alliance, as we have known it, as you have known it, those those of you who are of Turkish nationality since 1952-53 when we joined. My country has been in fact in NATO for the last 15 years only, but we have to make sure, all of us, that the country in fact that our countries are served by the alliance to the best or the best possible way. And that's why also I think it's very important to have this kind of programs. I understand that only a minority of you are actually involved in the NATO module or NATO committee. But I think we will have an opportunity to discuss security issues which concern not only NATO but also the UN Security Council in the Q&A section. When discussing the topic of this, and that will be the last point I'll be making, and then we'll go to Q&As, was also, to say a few words about the current, about the Islamic State and the campaign it is waging, in a very close neighborhood to your country. I think there is no doubt that NATO would beat Islamic State should it cross into Turkey. We have contingency plans for the defense of all our allies who could be at risk. As the Secretary General said, and our Secretary General visited Turkey only last week, Article 5 is always there for allies, and we stand by to defend Turkey if it is directly attacked. It would have to be a collective decision, and each nation would then decide where it could best contribute. I think it is a good demonstration of solidarity that Germany has now been deploying the Patriots for 2 years, which was a response to a threat that still exists, a ballistic missile attack on Turkey. Together with Germany, we have also Netherlands and the United States who have been deploying their Patriot missiles in three locations around Turkey. Turkey is an important ally living in a very tough neighborhood. There is no question about that. I think the Turks themselves recognize that the policy of zero problems with neighbors of a few years ago has not played out as optimistically as all of us would have hoped. My understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Turkey is and does understand itself to be part of the coalition. It was present at the original meeting at the Wales Summit. But the question now is, what contribution will Turkey make? And I understand that there recently made some decisions by the Turkish government. I will just reiterate that NATO is here, for Turkey, and Turkey is here for NATO, and we hope that the challenges that all of our countries face will be handled, and that in a few years we will be again living in a better world. Let me stop here, and I think we can go for Q&As if you have any views. Well, the Spear Force, which is the very high readiness task force, the details still needs to be decided, and that we will have a summit in 2 years in Warsaw in 2016, whereby by which date the Spear Force would be basically already operational. In a way, it is a force which will be created within the NATO response force, which was created a few years ago, on a much higher readiness level. That is to say, within 48 hours, at least the elements should be deployable and ready to use. We are talking here about a few thousand of troops who would be, continuously on a rotating basis to be deployed if need be in the area of that where such a deployment would be relevant. Thank you.
Actually, we know that different delegations from America, actually USA, have gone to Ukraine, and I've met the ministers there, the acting ones now. that actually are going to discuss about the negotiations postponed. So we see that the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation has also met the Ukraine ministries and also the USA about negotiations postponed. So we're asking, is political solutions or diplomacy still a solution to this?
Well, I can tell you that in NATO we believe that there is no solution other than political to this crisis. Recently, in fact yesterday, President Putin made an announcement that Russian troops from the border, of Ukraine will be withdrawn. But of course, it needs to be seen because similar announcements were made in the past, and we are not always on it. If I understand you correctly, President Poroshenko and President Poroshenko of Ukraine and President Putin of Russia are supposed to meet next Friday at Milan, and that hopefully will be a contribution to the crisis. Because honestly, we have seen too many violations of the ceasefire that was of the Minsk Protocol. The ceasefire between the separatists, or as they call them, terrorists in Ukraine, and Ukrainian forces and the ensuing Minsk Protocol, but there were way too many violations of that ceasefire. So it really depends on the situation on the ground. But I can assure you, from on NATO's part, that it is really a political solution which is ultimately the only way out of this horrible conflict. I think there are one gentleman on the back.
Thank you. So we have a question. Considering this speech that has been made by the German deputy speaker last night, Claudia Ruth, stating that NATO must stop Turkey from assisting ISIS. What is your personal and NATO's opinion on such speech?
I'm really, I cannot comment on it because I haven't seen and haven't read the speech, so it would be very difficult for me to comment on it, because I really have to see that. And as a rule, NATO officials do not comment on pronouncements made by NATO countries' representatives. Sorry about that.
Okay, thank you.
One more question is actually today BHMUN actually had some conflicts in the organization about refugees. Are there any actually possibilities that we are having refugees from Ukraine actually moving to European Union countries that are in NATO?
Mm-hmm. Well, there have been some people affected by the crisis who ended up in our countries. But most refugees are actually in Western Ukraine or in the non-conflict parts of Ukraine, and also quite a few of them found refuge in Russia proper. So I think this is where we are. Of course, we have some. I think the international community doesn't always feel comfortable with the figures that the Russian authorities have been providing for the figures about the figures of refugees in Russia. But I think it's more in that respect. But it's a disastrous situation by every count.
One more question, because
Yeah, sure.
everybody asking. As currently, Crimea is actually under pro-Russian control, right? Crimea
Yes.
is presently under pro-Russian control. Yeah, so if the negotiations come out actually, if this conflict end, is Crimea going to go back to Ukraine?
Well, it's not only under Russian, Russian government. It's actually an integral part of Russia. And I can assure you that, from NATO's part, there will be never any recognition of that illegal annexation of a territory which belongs to a sovereign country that is Ukraine. So I think what we are probably seeing is an issue which will be in NATO-Russia relationship for years, or if not decades to come, because NATO will never recognize that illegal annexation. By the way, there's also this myth, that somehow Crimea was added to Ukraine against the will of the Crimean people. You know? And indeed, in 1954, when Crimea was handed over by Khrushchev to Ukraine, it was done as a typical bureaucratic decision. And nobody actually asked the Crimeans whether they wanted to be part of the Ukraine Soviet Socialist Republic of Russian Socialist Federal Socialist Republic. However, and it didn't really make much of a difference whether you were part of Soviet Ukraine or Soviet Russia. But it's very often forgotten that in 1991 there was a referendum which took place also in Crimea, and 54% of the Crimeans back then said they, pronounced themselves in favor of sovereign Ukraine and Crimea being part of it. So that indeed was a decision, or legitimization, if you will, of Crimea's inclusion into Ukraine. At the same time, what happened, what we saw on the 11th of March, was a totally illegal referendum, which did not respond to any international criteria, was not in line or the requirements of any. It was first of all taking place strictly against the letter and the spirit of the Ukrainian constitution, but also the referendum itself was simply illegal by any account except for the Russian.
Thank you.
If there are not any questions, let me thank you very much for your kind attention, for your questions, I think it's important for an organization such as NATO, but also others that have been represented here in this framework of this game. It is a game. It's supposed to be fun, and I think it was fun. For people, for the successive generation to be interested in those issues. And let me express my hope that this will be the case, at least for the people who are in this room here. That we wish you all the best in your professional and private lives, and good luck.
Thank you, Dr. MUN, for this enlightening speech and for your time.